No other country understands the nuclear threat and its impact more than Japan. It's been 72 years since atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What does this rising DPRK threat mean for the U.S.-Japan military alliance? Let me turn to Associate Professor Kurt Piehler, live from Tallahassee, Florida. He's director of the Institute on World War II and the Human Experience at Florida State University. Kurt, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to us about how Japan and the United States really share the same concerns when it comes to dealing with the threat posed by DPRK, but do they agree on how to resolve it?
It's a complicated question because I think the governments, I think particularly the Japanese government, does not want to see war. I would say the American government, at least the generals, do not want to see war. I'm not sure exactly what the Trump administration how it's going to resolve the question. I would say that, having just been to Japan last month, I could say the Japanese people are deeply divided over the question of war and peace, and many do not want to see a militarized Japan. So I think all sides, I think we do recognize, both Americans and Japanese, that we must try to avoid war, at the same time try to neutralize the North Korean threat to the United States and to Japan and really to the region.
And how do you think the crisis on the Korean Peninsula really affected the Japan-U.S. military alliance?
Well, I think in some ways it continues to strengthen the alliance, because I think both sides fear North Korea, and just the proximity of Japan to North Korea makes the threat very real for Japan. And I would say, you know, the alliance, it is striking to me how strong the Japanese-American alliance has been over since the end of World War II. It's a remarkable alliance, I think partly born of fear, but I also think there are deeper roots to it.
Is there an obligation, or maybe I should say, is the U.S. committed to defend Japan militarily if attacked?
Well, we have a treaty with Japan that says we're going to defend Japan. We also have forces in Japan to really back up that. So it's hard to imagine the United States, particularly with troops on the ground in Japan, that they would not defend Japan. And I think there's a strong commitment by Americans to defend Japan.
Talk to us about China, a global power in the region, around the world. How does China view the long-standing alliance between Tokyo and Washington, and what changes, if any, do you expect under this administration?
This administration is very hard to predict. I would say, I think China, while it's trying to assert its power as a major power, and that's to me completely understandable, I think China wants stability. I think it wants to advance its interests, but I see China, while trying to in some ways press its advantages as a great power, also wants stability. And I think that in many ways does unite Japanese leaders, Japanese people, the Chinese leaders, Chinese people, and American leaders in the desire for stability. I think no one wants instability, and I think particularly China definitely does not want war, nor does Japan, and nor do Americans.
Kurt, with the crisis on the Korean Peninsula continuing to make headlines around the world, I want to ask you a question about timing and symbolism of Trump's language on DPRK, words like fire and fury, like the world has never seen, just hours before the 72nd anniversary of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki.
Yeah, I find that rhetoric, I think probably American diplomats within the U.S. Foreign Service have cautioned the White House about such rhetoric. And I think also, I just think, unfortunately, President Trump is probably not well versed in the history of nuclear weapons and the dangers they present. And even a limited nuclear strike would be a catastrophe, just in terms of the radiation it would release, not only to the area that was struck, but to the world. I mean, we learned that even with atomic bomb testing. It contaminated the milk around the world. That's one of the reasons we don't do atomic testing, above ground atomic testing, because of that threat. We even realized that in the Cold War in the 1960s.
All right, we certainly appreciate it. Kurt Piehler, thank you so much.